Hey riders, let's talk about seated climbing now. Seated climbing is something that we would use when we're on a long gradual climb that we want to maintain efficiency on. When we are approaching that climb, we want to think about shifting to the appropriate gear based on what we see ahead. As the trail begins to steepen, we're going to think about lowering our shoulders and bending our arms, getting closer to the front of the bike. A little bit of bike and body separation there. As the trail continues to steepen, we're going to slide forward in the saddle to promote an even more forward position on the bike. And that's intended to keep that front wheel planted on the ground so that we can maintain our balance and our direction as we're going up the climb. I'm going to show you what that looks like now. All right, coaches, let's dive into a little bit of the why related to seated climbing. As I mentioned a moment ago, there are 3 methods of climbing, and we start with the seated climb, which is typically the most basic. As we are thinking about that seated climb, we want to think about looking ahead and developing a plan as we're approaching a climb. And that usually involves guessing the steepness of the grade and how difficult it's going to be, and then shifting into the appropriate gear as we're approaching. We may need to shift again on the climb, but just know that getting in what we think is going to be the correct gear as we start is the best way to begin the climb. Additionally, I mentioned how we have to move forward as we are going up the climb, as the trail steepens. That's bike and body separation, and it's borrowed from what we touched on earlier. That's intended to ensure that we keep that front tire on the ground. Hey coaches, let's talk about a few progressions that we can introduce to the riders as they're progressing their seated climbing. Note that at first we're just going up the climb, possibly through cones, having them do what we did during our demonstration. The next thing that we can do is suggest that the riders change gears. Have them do it 1 or 2 gears easier, and then again 1 or 2 gears harder, and help them to differentiate how gear selection is going to make seated climbing either easier or harder. Another great progression is obviously to change the grade or the steepness of the climb. Have the riders approach a climb guessing what gear they should be in and see how it works out. Another progression is to combine this with other methods of climbing. We'll talk more about that as we introduce those other methods of climbing. And then our last progression would be to think about how we can combine shifting with this exercise. Having riders shifting as they go up the climb. We covered shifting previously, and now is a great time to reintroduce that and reinforce how important shifting is. All right, coaches, now let's talk about a few errors and the appropriate corrections that we'll use when we see riders practicing. The first is that they're not in the appropriate gear. They may be too easy or it may be too hard, and we're seeing them spinning as they're going up the trail, not really going anywhere or getting there as quickly as they could. And then conversely, we may see them in too hard of a gear. So let's help them to understand that they should shift gears early and one at a time in order to find the appropriate gear to get up this climb most efficiently. Another error that we often see, which I mentioned a little bit as we were going over the why, is that the rider's remaining too far back. In that case, the front tire is getting light, and we'll often see riders suggest, like, I can't get the bike to go where I want it to go, and that's really because they're not keeping enough weight on that front tire. They need to move forward in the saddle in order to keep the front tire on the ground with good traction, so it's tracking and controlling their direction.